What is up, Pauper players? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper Saturday video. Today we are going to take a look at a deck that has been doing very well in Pauper challenges over the last few weeks, very consistently, and in general has been on a huge upswing and is a bit of a resurgence in Pauper. The archetype kind of fell out of favor for quite a while, and so today we are going to take a look at Blue Fairies for Pauper. We're going to run some games and take a look at the power this deck is putting out and see why it's being so successful right now. So let's hit the intro, hit the deck tech, and take a look at these games. Alrighty, looking at the deck, we have a pretty standard-ish Blue Fairy tempo strategy. You can see 18 land here with 4 Lorien revealed. That is one of the newest additions alongside Murmuring Mystic. But we have 4 type dual lands, Contaminated Aquifers. We have 10 islands. We have 1 swamp, 1 Obscura Storefront, 1 Demur Aqueduct, and 1 Bojuka Bog. In the land base, the Bojuka Bog obviously for graveyard, the Demur Aqueduct to get back the Bojuka Bog when you need it. Also to enable us to keep some hands that maybe we wouldn't normally keep otherwise. And then Obscura Storefront is just an extra fetch land plus gain life. The gain life I haven't seen be super relevant, but definitely have fetched with it and seen success. In the 1-drop slot, we have 4 Preordains, 3 Brainstorms, and 3 Fairy Seers. There is a Fae package. You can see the 4 Spellstutter sprites right over here. Only 3 Brainstorms is fairly standard with these Lorien revealed these days. Preordain is just far too good not to be running 4 of right now. For Augur of Bolas, this is a card that has definitely fallen out of favor lately for a Philagi Archaeologist. Instead, the 0403, sorry, that becomes a 1/4 if you discard, or if you the 03 that becomes a 1/4 during its ability. And then we have a suite of counter spells to go along with these Spellstutter sprites. 2 cast downs, a single Chainers, and a single Agony Warp. Chainers and Agony Warp are there pretty much for Guardian of the Guildpact Insurance. With the rise of Caw Gates in popularity lately, it's kind of relevant and definitely necessary to have answers for Guardian of the Guildpact. We have a single Suffocating Fumes in the main. This is just main board insurance against things like the Goblin Storm Red Koldatha deck that's going really wide with Goblin tokens on a big swing turn. We have 4 Snuff Outs. This is just the premium black removal. We have 3 Ninja of Deep Hours. This is one of our main tempo tools to really start out with a really powerful curve of like 1-drop fairy into a ninja, or bouncing a Spellstutter, or bouncing an Augur of Bolas. We have a lot of ETB effects to rebuy, including this Thorn of the Black Rose, which can be a nice play pattern to bounce if they ever steal the Monarch and then get it back. We have 2 Thorn of the Black Rose for Monarch generation. This is pretty much for control matchups, but the Death Touch is relevant in a lot of the Gates decks that you'll see. We have a single Murmuring Mystic. This is the other new addition of the deck. This is a very powerful finisher that creates board states that get away from your opponents very fast, especially when you're looking at so many Preordains and Brainstorms, counterspells, and removal and things like that. Those 1-for-1 removals all of a sudden start generating bodies, and things get very good for you very fast. Those 4 Lorien revealeds, as I mentioned, are enabling this really streamlined mana base, so that's definitely helpful, as well as being a very powerful spell in the control or tempo mirror. Just to draw 3 cards in the late game is very strong. And then a single Gurmag Angler. Now, I'm not so sure about the 1 of here. Maybe we move this Suffocating Fumes for a second Gurmag Angler. It does mean that the deck is a little bit light in terms of finishing or closing potential. But in general, you're going to kind of suffocate your opponents out with card advantage and 1-for-1 until they're out of cards, and then just beat them down slowly. That is usually how these decks tend to play out. And in my experience, that has been true here. But I do like the Gurmag Angler as a finisher. It has definitely come in clutch. For sideboard, we have 6 Red Blast effects. Now you can have them split in whatever way you have. I have 4 Blue Elemental Blasts, 2 Hydro Blasts, but you can have 3 and 3. You can have 4 and 2 the other way. It doesn't matter. There's not a ton of relevant times that is going to, the difference is going to be palpable for you. I have a single Dispel in the sideboard. We have 2 Chainer's Edicts and an Agony Warp. We have an extra Suffocating Fumes, a Stormbound Geist against mono blue and other decks that don't have hard removal, just because it's very difficult for them to get rid of. Especially the Mirror, because it just can never, ever die to fairies, and they can never attack into it. A third Thorn of the Black Rose, a Arms of Hadar to bring into the main against really go-wide strategies. And then we have an Okiba Gang Shinobi. This is again for the control mirrors. It can also be used in the tempo matchup if you are on the play, but in general, this is going to be for the control mirrors. So that is the deck, guys. This deck is very powerful, if not a little bit linear in terms of its strategy. It really just wants to get on the board quickly with 1 or 2 small dudes, start to accumulate value, and then kind of suffocate out your opponent and really just take away their ability to come back in the game. You deny them resources, deny them a foothold, and then just take over the board and win very quickly once they've lost control. It can play very control-y in the early and mid-game, depending on your draw. If you don't have a creature opener and you're just looking at a bunch of removal spells, some counter spells, and like a 4-drop or something, you can definitely slow the game plan down quite a bit. But in general, you're going to be tempoing out your opponents, and that's why the deck has been so good lately. 1-for-1 removal and board wipe backup with counter spells, especially when you have so much red hate, to ensure that you're not losing to those Kuldotha matchups. In general, the 6 Red Blast plus Counterspell plus Spell Stutter with Suffocating Fumes is going to be good enough to beat red. And then all the other decks that are trying to beat red, you are pretty well positioned against. They don't have a ton of answers to fairies and things of that nature, so you've got a lot of kind of game plan against everything that isn't red, and against red, you just bring in all the counter spells in the world. That is the deck. Very excited to show you guys some games. Had some fantastic test games with this deck, so we are going to jump into match number 1. All right, there we go. We lose the die roll, so we are on the draw. We're going to take a mulligan here. And this is a much better hand. 3 lands, double Lorien Revealed, Spell Stutter, Mystic. It doesn't do a ton in the early game, but seems like we're able to throw back a land pretty easily here. So we're going to keep this. And to start off the game, we see a Black Dragon Gate, which says to me a couple of different things, but mainly there has been a red-white splashing red for Scrapwork Mutt Gates deck running like Sacred Cats and Scrapwork Mutt with the black-white 2/2 lifelink creature, Breathless Knight. And that's been doing pretty well in leagues and did appear in a challenge, I think it was last week. So that's the only real deck that comes to mind when I see this card. So that's what I'm going into the early game kind of prepping for. We hit an Agony Warp here, and we just play our sack land for a swamp to ensure we have both colors. Opponent does show us a Scrapwork Mutt, so we know immediately we are against the deck that I was expecting. We play our second land here and just decide to pass. The rationale here is that we have an Agony Warp if we need it. We're going to show a counterspell in a Spell Stutter sprite against the opponent, which was actually very, very good, considering they discarded the Breathless Knight to the Scrapwork Mutt's ability last turn. So we do counter this Unearth, which is very, very crucial in this matchup. The alternate line there was to play Augur of Bolas and then be prepared to Agony Warp anything they cast on this turn, but I think this plan's a little more proactive. It doesn't play around a lot, but because I'm familiar with this deck, I know that I need to play around Unearth, and the opponent definitely pays me off there. Opponent follows up with a Thraben Inspector. That's fine. Not much we can do about it anyway. We're going to go ahead and cycle Lorien Revealed here and then play an island. We're not going to get a dual land because we want to keep this second Spell Stutter sprite active. And we still have the Agony Warp as follow-up, so we're going to go ahead and keep this Spell Stutter up and just play it a little bit slow and see what the opponent leads into. Opponent shows us a Basilisk Gate, goes for an early activation. We're going to use the Agony Warp here to save us a little bit of life. Opponent follows up with a Sacred Cat, which is fine, if not a little annoying. We still haven't hit a land drop, so we're going to go ahead and ninjutsu out this Ninja the Deep Hours to buy back our Spell Stutter sprite. Then we're going to follow up with an Augur of Bolas here. This Augur of Bolas hits a Snuff Out, which is great for us. We're going to go ahead and pass back with double Spell Stutter and a Snuff Out in hand. Again, just trying to make sure we hit our land drops here. We still have a Lorien Revealed to cycle if we need it, but we'd rather cast it in this matchup because it's going to get really grindy with all these Sacred Cat embalms. Opponent pulls the trigger here while we're tapped out and goes for a Benevolent Blessing. Now, this is a really interesting idea because while we're tapped out, it forces us to be reactive, or he's going to have probably a pro-black Sacred Cat with lifelink that he can pump with his Gates Forever. Unfortunately for him, fortunately for us, we do in fact have the Snuff Out, so we're going to pull the trigger here and go ahead and snuff out that cat. Feels a little bit bad, but at least we get the Benevolent Blessing with it. Opponent follows up with a Mire Triton. This is fine with us. Opponent importantly milling a Crypt Rats there. We're going to untap. We attack with the ninja here. The mentality behind it is this: if the opponent allows us to draw, we're thankful for that, and we take the draw and see if we hit a land. If we don't hit a land, we have a decision point. We can cycle the Lorien Revealed to have 5 land total, 4 of it untapped, and we can keep double Spell Stutter sprite. Or with the opponent on 1 creature and only able to unearth 1 of these 2 Scrapwork Mutts on the side here because only 1 gate makes red. And they don't have a basic red source, worth noting. The only other thing they could top deck is a Heap Gate, but they'd still be 1 behind being able to unearth both. So we're not super afraid of a haste creature here. Opponent would need to unearth and have a removal spell, which seemed unlikely to me at the time. So we're going to take this trade and then run out our Thorn of the Black Rose and try to use the value to win us the late game. We take the Monarch. We hit a land drop, which is great for us. Opponent does unearth a Scrapwork Mutt. They follow up with a land, but just pump with the gate, which is great for us. It means they don't have a removal. We are just going to chump this because the Scrapwork Mutt is going to die on its own, so we don't need to worry about killing it. And then we're just going to pass the turn back here. We still have a creature, so the opponent has to play at least 1 more creature with haste to present a threat of stealing our Spell Stutter sprite. Or they can unearth the Scrapwork Mutt, and then we have a Spell Stutter to flash in if we need to. We could also top deck several things to this Monarch token, like Brainstorm or any number of our removal effects, which all seem good here. The idea is we want to be able to play Murmuring Mystic, but with Spell Stutter sprite backup. So we're looking to hit that 6th land drop, which we now have in hand before we play it. We top deck an Augur of Bolas, which is fine. We have the Monarch, and it has not been threatened realistically yet, so we're okay with that. Opponent, once again, going to pump with a gate here. We're just going to flash in this Spell Stutter sprite. Unfortunately, I mistimed my flash a little bit. I should have waited for him to attack with both, because then I would have been able to kill this Thraben Inspector with the Death Touch and still chump the Scrapwork Mutt. Just a little bit of a play error. It doesn't end up punishing me, fortunately, but just wanted to call that out. We top deck a Cast Down, which is great. That means that we can run out this Murmuring Mystic with Cast Down up, or a spell stutter up, depending on what we need, which is fantastic. And then we top deck a land for this Monarch. Opponent's going to Bajuka Bog us here, which is fine. It limits our Gurmag Angler draws, but at the end of the day, it's okay. Opponent attacks with his last creature. We're going to go ahead and block with the Death Touch here and just trade it up. We have a Murmuring Mystic in play. Opponent doesn't. You know, we're going to swarm the board much wider and faster than they can. And we are protecting the Monarch the whole time. So now we have a Cast Down up and a Spell Stutter up, or a Brainstorm if we want it. We're going to go ahead and attack. Opponent has a Sacred Cat, so he is going to activate the Basilisk Gate, try to gain a bunch of life. We're not going to let that happen. We're going to go ahead and get a bird token here and just start to absolutely take over the game. Opponent goes for an Unearth here on the Crypt Rats, which is a really sly line. We do have the Spell Stutter, but he has another Reborn effect for the Crypt Rats, which is annoying. Opponent now has 1 black mana up after that second Reborn effect for the Recommission. So we are going to force him to pop it by Cast Downing on our main phase here. This is going to kill the Spell Stutter and the bird, but at the end of the day, that's fine. It's going to end up leaving us with 2 creatures, and we're still going to get the Murmuring Mystic token. Opponent missequenced a little bit. They should have allowed the Murmuring Mystic ability to resolve first and then activated the Crypt Rats before the Cast Down resolved. And I wouldn't have a 1/1 bird, but not much they could do here. We have double Brainstorm in hand, so we have a lot of activations of this Murmuring Mystic if we want to, and then after the opponent loses the Crypt Rats, no cards in hand, they scoop it up, and we go to game 2. Game number 2 against Avaman. Our sideboard plan is as followed. We took out some Snuff Outs here and brought in a Chainer's Edict and an Arms of Hadar. The justification here is that the opponent has a lot of 1/1s, 1/2s, things like that that are going to come in and out of the graveyard repetitively, and we don't want him to be able to go wide on us. So we brought in another sweeper effect. We still have the 1 mainboard Suffocating Fumes, which is fine. I don't think we need a second one, although I did consider it. We saw black mana from the opponent, although we didn't see a whole bunch of black creatures. We know the deck runs Breathless Night at least, so Snuff Out does have limited targets if the opponent has their ideal curve, so we brought in some Chainer's Edicts to get around that limitation. Ultimately, we could have brought in another Agony Warp, we could have brought in another Chainers, we could have brought in a Suffocating Fumes. There's a lot of ways to take this sideboard. I'm not 100% sure of my plan. But I like the Arms of Hadar in this matchup quite a bit, just to get around things like those Thraben Inspectors, which are going to live through Suffocating Fumes, even though the cats and things won't. And then I like the Chainer's Edicts, the Arms of Hadar, and the Suffocating Fumes in this matchup, specifically because we saw Benevolent Blessing, so that's going to allow us to get around that protection from black. So that is the sideboard plan. We are obviously on the draw going into game 2. This is a very keepable hand, double land with Counterspell, Fairy Seer, double Ninja. We're definitely going to go on that tempo line where we just Fairy into Ninja and then try to curve out. Opponent leads on a Thraben Inspector. A little bit annoying because they're going to have early pressure if they go into gates. But we follow the original plan. We just Fairy Seer. We see a couple of things. We see a land and a Thorn of the Black Rose. We do like the dual land here. It gives us both. We're going to top both, looking for a turn to play that tap land and then play Thorn of the Black Rose and protect the Monarch just like we did last time. Very successful game plan for us last game, and we're going to look to repeat that. Opponent hits for 1, no big deal. And just passes the turn with 2 mana up. We are pretty sure they're just going to pop the Clue here. No instant speed white removal, and they don't have any black mana, so we're going to ninjutsu this while it's safe. Hopefully, we don't get punished for this. They don't have like a Breathless Night or something, but we know we have a tap land next turn with a Counterspell up and a Thorn of the Black Rose in hand. Not a ton that we like about this situation, just because it is a little bit on the slow side. But we do have a lot of options, so we're going to run that through and just hope that the opponent doesn't punish us too bad on the turn 3 tap out. Opponent does pop the clue like we suspected. Untaps and plays a Crypt Rats. Now, this is a scary card because we know of the Benevolent Blessing, and if he's able to Benevolent Blessing this Crypt Rats for pro black, it'll be able to boom the board without killing itself, which is terrifying. Very, very aware that that is a threat here, so we have to be careful of that. Really looking for a kill spell here, if we can find one. Otherwise, we're just going to really have to kind of play it slow, that this counter spell hits something to do with those rats, or if the opponent really tries to put some pressure on us, we're going to have to use it defensively. But there were a couple lines here. We can play this tap land to set up for a turn 4 Thorn if the opponent doesn't have a creature, which is a possibility. With 5 cards in hand, though, it seems unlikely. Or we can play this island and then run this Fairy Seer out and try to disguise this counter spell a little bit as like a Spellstutter Sprite, maybe. I like to kind of telegraph that I have a counterspell, which may be incorrect, but I think it's safer, and it gives me more options in the future. So I'm going to play this tap land here after we attack. Opponent gives us a free Thraben Inspector, which is fine, and then we're just going to telegraph that we have this. Opponent does pull the trigger on the Benevolent Blessing, so it's really good that we were able to keep that counterspell up instead of trying to dig or going too deep with a recast the Fairy Seer Preordain line or anything like that. Definitely rewarded for keeping that counterspell up. That's a big hit. And then the opponent ends up with a couple mana open, but not doing anything, just passing it back with a black and a colorless up. We're going to drop this Fairy Seer, and if the opponent wants to boom for 1, that's fine. Probably should have attacked first, just put the opponent in a little bit less advantageous position to boom for 1. But it is what it is. We go ahead and bottom the land, top the Brainstorm. We're going to attack for 2. Opponent does take the block and boom for 1 to kill the Fairy Seer. We go ahead and Preordain. We know the Brainstorm's on top, but we wanted to take a look and see if we could find anything else. We hit a counterspell here, which is very, very good. We're going to attack with the Ninja again. Opponent lets us through. They do recommission that Rats after they boomed it last turn. So they have a 2/2 Rats now, which is very difficult to deal with because they can just boom it for 1 every turn. So our 1/1s, our Spellstutter, excuse me, our Spellstutters and things like that really are not going to have much effect with the Crypt Rats that can boom for 1. We just have to hit a Chainers or some sort of a removal spell, so we were digging for that with the Preordain, but it didn't work out. That's fine. We do have an Augur here to play. But opponent gives us a card, we hit a Spellstutter Sprite and just pass back with 4 mana up. This has Spellstutter and Counterspell on it. Opponent's just going to pump and attack. I elect to take the 5 here. But I could have tried to block with the Spellstutter Sprite. Felt wrong to do so, so I didn't bother. Opponent is going to run out a Sacred Cat, though, and that we are absolutely going to try to Spellstutter. We're going to make the opponent pop this for 1 if he's going to, and that's fine. Now the opponent is tapped out going into our next turn, which we like quite a bit. We hit an Agony Warp off the draw, which is fantastic. We go ahead and deal with this Crypt Rats just so it's no longer an issue for us. Opponent does have a Sacred Cat out, which is a little bit annoying. We're going to pass the turn back with a Counterspell up yet again, really making our opponent kind of play through our action instead of being reactive. Opponent chump blocks for some reason. Not really sure about that one, but it's fine. It's a Sacred Cat. He's going to embalm it anyway. Opponent runs out another Crypt Rats. This one we do have the Counterspell for, though, so we're going to go ahead and counter that. Opponent is then going to cast a Breathless Knight. So this is a little bit dangerous, but it's the reason we took out some Snuff Outs, just because we can't draw Snuff Out to kill it. And we didn't want to be in a position where we had to race against a Breathless Knight because it was going to be very difficult for us to do so. Unfortunately for the opponent, we're just the best and top deck a counterspell. Or cast down, sorry, not a counterspell. Never didn't have it. Attack for 2, offer the trade. Opponent doesn't take it. While they're tapped out, we just go ahead and play this Thorn of the Black Rose and then flat out counterspell the Breathless Knight. This just locks in the emblem, makes sure they don't have another Benevolent Blessing or something as an instant speed trick to get around the counterspell, or Village Rites or Deadly Dispute, or, you know, something strange like that. They can get some value out of it when we commit to it. So we take the 1-for-1 while they're tapped out, play the Thorn to guarantee the emblem sticks for at least 1 turn. Opponent on 1 card in hand at this point, so we feel like we have a pretty strong lock on the game. Turns out the last card was a Scrapwork Mutt, and then they're going to embalm this Sacred Cat. We top deck an Arms of Hadar, which is great here. We brought it in. We just wiped the board, and the opponent scoops it up. So very, very strong showing. You can definitely see how this deck kind of just closes down and suffocates the opponent gradually through card advantage and 1-for-1s until they're out of steam. I mean, you can see here, opponent at 0 cards in hand, and we have a grip full of value here still. So lots of play. This deck is a powerhouse. Let's go on to match number 2. All right, match number 2, we are against Dyro. We do win the die roll, and we're going to be on the play here. Let's see what we've got. We have a very land-heavy hand. It was 5 lands, a Lorien Revealed, and a Spell Stutter Sprite. We go ahead and throw that back. That's not going to get it done against any of the like Tier 1 competitive meta decks, so we just feel like that's going to be far too passive. We keep a 2-mana hand here. Lorien Revealed, Brainstorm Counterspell, Ninja. We have a bit of a think on what we're going to throw back here, actually. Not 100% sure. We end up throwing back the Ninja. The justification here is just we don't have anything to really guarantee that we're going to get in with, and the chances of, you know, turn 3 and Augur of Abolus being able to attack in and not get blocked are fairly low against most of the aggressive meta decks. So we go ahead and throw the Ninja back just as an insurance policy. Make sure that make sure that we have our Counterspell, our Brainstorm to find a land drop and things like that. Just to make sure our draw goes as smoothly as possible, and then we will kind of refill off the Augur of Bolas and maybe this Lorien Revealed if we don't need to cash it in for a land. So that's the play. That's kind of the line that I chose here with this mulligan decision, and we're going to go ahead and kick it off with turn 1. We're just going to drop an island and pass. We do have a decision at the end of this turn whether or not we're going to cycle. We choose to Brainstorm instead. We don't hit a land, which is fairly distressing, but we do hit a Fairy Seer, which is pretty good. We have a second land drop already, so it's not too bad for us here. We top deck the Counterspell we put back, so we have a Spell Stutter now. We have a pretty reasonable curve. We're going to play a land into Augur of Bolas just to ensure that we get the value here because we put double Counterspell back on top. So we drew 1, we Augur the second. We do mill a Swamp here, which is a little bit sad, but it's not the worst case scenario. Not mill, sorry. We do miss a Swamp and put it on the bottom here. But we've got an Augur in play now. Turns out our turn 3 attack for 1 and then blink a Ninja into play with Ninjutsu may have worked out for us, but opponent does play Gates and then play a Basilisk Gate, shows us a Black Dragon Gate again, but chooses white. We don't see red. This could be another instance of that same red-white black deck, but then opponent plays a Spirited Companion, which is quite strange here. This makes me initially think that it's some sort of Pestilence control, which is a deck I played quite a bit with the Gate package, and I do think is quite good. Really interested to see kind of what else comes out of the opponent here, but my strategy is going to be very control-focused. I think this is going to be a long, grindy game. So that's kind of where I'm at when I see this card played. I think we're going to be in for the long haul, so hold on to your butts. It's going to be a long game. We brainstorm looking for a land drop again, but fail to find it again. This time we do choose to cycle the Lorien for a dual land, keeping a Suffocating Fumes and a Chainer's Edict. Seeing gates with black-white and what I consider a control card, which is a Spirited Companion, makes me think that I'm going to need to deal with some Guardian of the Guild packs in this matchup, so I definitely value this Chainer's Edict pretty highly. With gates, I also expect to see some number of Sacred Cats or Squadron Hawks or anything like that, so I'm looking for my Bojuka Bog here, but keeping this Suffocating Fumes up just in case the opponent goes really wide on 1/1s. Definitely feels like something I'm going to need to get some value out of here. It is a bit sad that we missed our land drop on the second Brainstorm, but fortunately we had the Lorien to cycle from our mulligan. That's why we kept it. So we'll run it from here and see what we get. Opponent plays another Spirited Companion. Unfortunately, it's not as good a value as it looks to Suffocating Fumes it, just because he's already gotten both cards off of these, so it's not really a 2-for-1 because they replace themselves. You can see here, opponent still at 7 cards in hand. So we like to play it a little bit slower. We go for a Fairy Seer here. We see a land, Preordain. We keep both. We just want to make our land drops here. We do have the Spell Starter counterspell up, so we can kind of pick and choose what responses we want to use. We're going to attack for 1 here off of the trade. Opponent doesn't take it, just blinks for 1. Opponent, go ahead and Sacred Cats here. We're going to let this Sacred Cat resolve with the plan of Suffocating Fumes next turn. Then opponent pumps the Spirited Companion with the gates. We elect to just take the 5, knowing that we're going to wipe the board here. We top deck the Preordain. We play the Preordain. We hit the Swamp. We go ahead and play the Suffocating Fumes to wipe the opponent's board here. Now, we could have afforded to wait to draw a Bojuka Bog or something like that to make sure that no additional value from those Sacred Cats is done. Maybe even hit a second Sacred Cats or made sure the opponent doesn't have any other graveyard shenanigans, something like that Breathless Night from last time. Unfortunately, we just don't have a ton of redraws here without a Ninja. Augur of Bolas isn't going to get us a land drop, so don't think we can afford to wait for Bojuka Bog, and we just pull the trigger here and ping for 2. We do see an Orzhov Guildgate from the opponent, which makes me pretty sure they're not on a 3-color gates list, and I think they're primarily on white-black, which again does kind of reaffirm that initial Pestilence thought. Opponent pays for a Guardian of the Guild pack. This is exactly why I valued that Chainer's Edict we drew earlier. I had a suspicion we were going to have to play against some number of them. We kept the Chainer's Edict through those brainstorms, and we definitely got rewarded here. This is the easiest Chainer's Edict of my life, and then we do have a cast down and a spell starter and a counterspell, so we hold this 2 mana up, just pick for 2. Again, not afraid of taking a slow approach here, although the opponent is set up to gain a lot of life with multiple Sacred Cats. Opponent does a really good job of cashing in his Sacred Cats very quickly to minimize the amount of value we get off of a Bojuka Bog. That is something that I should probably get better at when I play with Sacred Cats. So just something to keep in mind. Opponent is very consistently trading in his Sacred Cats with Embalm as soon as he can. He's not really sandbagging them for value or to run out of resources. He's cashing them in right away, which is something I think a lot of people do wrong. So good on to the opponent. Definitely playing the deck very well so far. Opponent showing us double Sacred Cat with doublest Basilisk Gate up. I mean, the game is probably going to go long here. Opponent is set up to gain a lot of life unless we are prepared to chain through a lot of removal to deal with some 1-drops. And I don't think that that's a winning fight. So we may be in chump block territory here until we can stabilize. We're going to go ahead and attack in, offer the trade. Opponent's not going to take it. Obviously, he's just going to pump with this Basilisk Gate and attack. My hope here was that he would pump the token and not the original cat, which would have been the incorrect play. Opponent does not fall for that. He pumps the original. We are just going to cast down this to minimize the bleeding. It does feel bad to cast down a 1-drop, but at least it is At least it is a 3-mana investment from the opponent, so we know that they're not going to have a ton to follow up with. They're likely just to embalm it again. So once again, we're still looking for that Arms of Hadar, or apologies. We're still looking at things like probably bringing in the second Suffocating Fumes, Arms of Hadar, things like that from the sideboard. But we are prepared for kind of a longer game here. We are definitely going to be spending a lot of removal on these ones because we've already burned our Suffocating Fumes. We do have a Chainer's Edict in the graveyard, but with 4 mana out and we're kind of bricking on land drops, that's definitely a long way out. So we're going to have to eke as much value as we can out of this game and see if we can stabilize through their life gain. As planned, we cast down that Sacred Cat, take the 1. We hit a Thorn of the Black Rose, which is great. It gives us a huge in for this value game plan to keep into it, and it allows us to be a lot more liberal when we spend our resources on these 1-drops because we're going to be drawing 2 cards to the opponent's 1. This is a fantastic top deck for us. We just slam the Thorn of the Black Rose there. It's also a Death Touch creature, which trades with either of these through a Basilisk Gate, which is great for us. Unfortunately, opponent has a Journey to Nowhere. That's fine. Removal at some point is expected from the deck that has black and white in it, so we just kind of take that. Unfortunate. But opponent can't do a whole lot else on their turn. They just pump one of the Sacred Cats. We're going to go ahead and snuff out it. Again, now that we've got that emblem, we really just want to protect the emblem and ride that to victory. So we're going to go ahead and drop this Augur of Bolas. Unfortunately, it misses, which is brutal. We're really just kind of in chump block mode. We want to just get through these tokens and then try to pick off the creatures as opponent plays them with our counter spells. We hit a Brainstorm, which is pretty good, but we whiff on our Augur of Bolas and send our Murmuring Mystic to the bottom of the deck, which feels awful. That's definitely a card we wanted to see here, especially with Brainstorm, Counterspell, those kind of things, so that we could start going very wide on the board and try to close out the game quickly. So it's really unfortunate to throw that to the bottom. Opponent just attacking for 6 here. We're going to go ahead and Brainstorm, see if we can find a kill spell. We can't, which is unfortunate, but that's fine. We hit another counter spell, so we are very safe against top deck threats from the opponent here if they continue to spend all their mana on gates. We are just going to chump block this cat, though. Opponent's going to gain 6 life, which is a lot. They go for a Journey to Nowhere here to minimize our blockers, potentially setting up some sort of play to steal the Monarch. We're going to just counterspell that. Now that we have 2 in hand plus a Spell Starter Sprite, we're just going to take it. Unfortunately, we do miss block a little bit. We should not block with our Fairy Seer to ensure that our Spell Stutter is still active. Because we block with the Fairy Seer, we don't have a Spell Stutter for 2 mana anymore, which is a little bit unfortunate, so we have to spend a counterspell. Would have rather been able to Spell Stutter that Journey. Play the Storefront, get a land here. And we just elect to pass here. Counterspell Spell Stutter is very, very powerful. We have 4 mana up, 5 mana. We are in chump block mode, though, so we are likely going to be chump blocking the Sacred Cat and letting opponent gain another 6 to 7 life, which isn't what we want to do, but it's the best option. We're trying to hold this Thorn of the Rose here in case opponent does manage to steal the Monarch. We want to take it back with the Thorn of the Black Rose, but that's mainly just consideration for things like Prismatic Strands or, another Crypt Rats that can boom the board after he steals it or something like that to prevent us from recapturing it, because that will very quickly lose us this game. So this is more of an insurance policy, not really a tempo play. We're looking to just run some counter spells out and minimize the opponent's impact on the board. Opponent pumps the Sacred Cat after playing another gate. We're just going to let the opponent gain 7 and chump. We have a lot of time here. We have a lot of play. We hit a Snuff Out, which is good for us. That allows us to run this Thorn of the Black Rose out because now we're not afraid of some play for the opponent to steal it. We know the opponent can't snuff out our Thorn, and if the opponent tries to attack again, it allows us to block and trade with his huge cat. Feels bad to trade with a token, but at least it is able to kill the token. We do hit a 6th land, which allows us to keep 2 mana up, so once again, we're still on Spellstarter Sprite and Counterspell up. Have a lot of play here. Just going to pass it to the opponent here. We're not going to tempt fate by attacking for 1 or anything like that. Opponent does have a cast down. They go for it. End of turn. We have to counterspell that, unfortunately. Would have liked to spell stutter that, but once again, we're seeing kind of the impact of chump blocking with that Fairy Seer earlier. Opponent with a big play here now that we're tapped out. They go for a Ceruli Gatekeepers, which is a really interesting card because it shows me that now they're in green. So this is a black, white, green gate stack. Opponent runs the Gatekeepers out, goes to 33, which is a lot of life. We do have a Snuff Out, which is good for us. It allows us to have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of whether or not they pump these Sacred Cats. But because we have a Death Toucher on the board still, the opponent has to be pretty careful about what they attack with. So that does give us a little bit of stabilization power here. We get a little bit of breathing room to start to accumulate some cards again, which is nice. Double Spell Stutter, Snuff Out in hand. Triple Spell Stutter now off the draw. We see a fourth Spell Stutter, but throw it down in favor of a Cast Down off the Preordain. We just pass again. Very passive here. We are pretty committed to letting the opponent cast themselves out, which is often the game plan against the control deck for this deck. We hit a counterspell, which is very good for us, and then we also have a cast down, so we have all the action. Opponent pumps the token, goes for the attack, we cast down it, and then opponent sacrifices it to Village Rites. I have a pretty strong decision point here. I really think about whether or not this is the right play. I know that the opponent has black-white colorless up, or black or white and colorless up, so they could have a cast down of their own. They could have a journey here. They could have a few things after I play this counterspell, but we are going to take our spot and spell stutter while we can. It just feels like the right move here. We have 3 in hand. We've got to start deploying these somehow so that the other ones are turned on. And the opponent leads with a Skyfisher, which is fine. Picking up the Ceruli Gatekeeper, we do have a counterspell in hand for that, which is okay. We know that this Skyfisher is going to be pretty annoying because it is a flying attacker. We can't chum block with Thorn or something like that. So looking at this Snuff Out for this Skyfisher pretty strongly, we are going to take our spot, though, now that the opponent is tapped out and has kind of shown us what their game plan is. They're taking it slow as well. They're just life gaining, you know, that kind of thing. We're just going to go ahead and cast this Lorien Revealed, and our game plan here is that we're going to hit an untapped land on the Lorien Revealed most of the time, which still gives us access to Snuff Out, Counterspell, or Spell Stutter Sprite, because all of our untapped lands at this point are islands. Really hoping we don't hit a tapped land. That would be unfortunate, because it would be shields down, although we do still have a Snuff Out, so there is some insurance here. Unfortunately, we do not hit an untapped land, which is unfortunate. We hit a Contaminated Aquifer and a Bojuka Bog. The Bojuka Bog is good here. Maybe relevant if the opponent has more Sacred Cats or anything like that. Now at this point, they're down to 3 cards. We have pretty successfully started choking them out of resources, which is great for us. Had this Monarch token for quite a few turns, down to 25 cards in deck. Keep an eye on this deck counter. It's going to get low this game. We do have the option of casting a Preordain here with 1 mana up. There's not a whole lot we can represent with a single mana up, so we do cast the Preordain. We get an Augur of Bolus off of it, and we are just going to hold this Snuff Out up as insurance and pass it back. We hit our untapped land, which is kind of ironic. Opponent attacks for 10 with his Core Skyfisher. We're just going to chump block with the Spell Stutter here. No reason to rush this Snuff Out. And at 11 life, we would like to just cast it. At this point, we're getting enough mana here where we can just cast the Snuff Out instead of having to hurt ourselves to do so. We top deck a Fairy Seer here, which does let us run that out to turn on these Spell Stutters. We see a Gurmag Angler on top, which is great. We top both because both are good cards. We draw the Gurmag Angler, just pass it back. Once again, we have Counterspell, Snuff Out, double Spell Stutter Sprite, really making the opponent kind of run into our action. Instead of being reactive, we're kind of forcing the opponent to play our game instead of letting the opponent play theirs. He goes for an Arms of Hadar. We have the Counterspell, which is great. He then tries to Basilisk Gate the Ceruli Gatekeepers. We're just going to let him attack with that. We realized he was targeting the Ceruli Gatekeepers, not the Core Skyfisher. Originally, we were going to snuff out the target of the Basilisk Gate, but instead we just elect to trade with it. And this allows us to snuff out the core Skyfisher, so we trade with the Gatekeeper. They still don't take the Monarch. We've once again very limited the opponent's options. They're down to 1 creature, which is a Gatekeeper Vine. We do have this Chainer's Edict that's been in the graveyard for quite a long time. That is live now that we've kind of whittled the opponent's creature count down. Obviously, we want to get this Gatekeeper Vine out of there first. We Fairy Seer, we see double land. We just throw that on the bottom here. This is definitely a Gurmag Angler turn. We're just going to throw the Gurmag Angler out there with double Spell Stutter up to protect it. The game plan is at this point, the opponent is on 40 life. We're really going to have to chunk down with this Gurmag Angler over several turns with a pretty wide board now that they're really low on resources. They're down to 3 cards with no graveyard after we Bojuka Bog them just to limit their options. We didn't want them to be cashing in on anything sneaky. Go ahead and just start to chip away now. Double Spell Stutter is a pretty strong insurance policy to keep this Gurmag Angler alive. Feels like this is our time to kind of shift the tide. Opponent runs out of Gatekeeper. That's fine. We could have fought over this Cerulean Gatekeepers, but 7 life is a lot less than the amount of life they're going to get off of Sacred Cat. We go ahead and play 1 Spell Stutter to minimize the impact of Sacred Cat. We're going to make them just Embalm it and see if we can't find a removal spell off this Augur of Bolas to deal with it. We top deck a land. Augur of Bolas, unfortunately, hits a counter spell, but not a removal spell, which is a little unfortunate. But now we can sort of pick our battles here. We're going to just get in there. We're on chump block duty for the Sacred Cat, but we really need to start pressuring the opponent. Opponent sacrifices the Gatekeeper Vine to Deadly Dispute, and rather than let the opponent refill their hand, we're just going to Spell Stutter the Deadly Dispute and keep this counterspell up as protection for Gurmag. Really hoping to hit a removal spell here so that they can't pump the Sacred Cat, and we do just hit one, which is great for us. We hit this Snuff Out. Opponent is going to double pump with the double Basilisk Gate and attack for a lot. We're going to just cast this Snuff Out, killing the Sacred Cat so they can't gain any life, and then chump block out the Cerulean Gatekeepers. We hit another Snuff Out on our turn, which is fantastic for us. Still have this Chainer's Edict live. We are just going to get in there, see if we can set up a turn where we can end of turn Snuff Out and then cash in a Gatekeeper, trying to make sure then we can trade in a Chainer's. We are trying to make him block with this Gatekeeper Vine. Unfortunately, it's 34 still, so really big life total. We're just kind of forcing the opponent to play into us. Opponent pumps a Cerulean Gatekeepers, then goes for a second Cerulean Gatekeepers. At this point, I have 15 cards in deck. Really wondering whether or not I'm going to be able to get it done before I run out of cards. Opponent swings, we just snuff out their threat. We still have this Chainer's Edict. Now the opponent is on 1 card. We bounce our Bojuka Bog with an Aqueduct, so we do have a Bojuka Bog in hand if they ever play another Squadron Hawk or Sacred Cat or anything like that. Really just looking to put as much pressure on them as possible. We're at 11 minutes on the clock with 14 cards in library, and this is just game 1 of this match, so really have to kind of turn the burners on and try to close out this game quickly so that we have enough time to finish the match. We top deck a Lorien Revealed. Unfortunately, opponent just plays the Dawnbringer Cleric to exile our Chainers, which is brutal. Really, we're counting on that value from the graveyard if we get in a sticky situation, but that's okay. We have a Lorien Revealed now, so opponent is going to make a treasure token and just pass back. We hit the Lorien Revealed, which is great for us, so we're just going to run that out. Go down to 9 cards in library. 8 once the Monarch triggers. We do hit a Ninja, which is really good for us. It allows us to buy back another Spell Stutter, and our Spell Stutter currently can counter spells of CMC 4 or less. We also have an Agony Warp here, so we've got lots of Guardian of the Guild Pact insurance. Opponent down to 1 card now, which is great for us. We're going to go ahead and ninja out and hit this Spell Stutter back in hand. We draw the 4th Spell Stutter back to our hand that we put on the bottom of the deck earlier. So we are down to the cards we've already seen, trying to hit this Murmuring Mystic now. Opponent down to 16, though, so we are in a pretty reasonable position. We're going to go ahead and Spell Stutter the Guardian of the Guild Pact, and we have a backup Spell Stutter just in case opponent has something sneaky, like a Suffocating Fumes. Opponent does not, though, just plays a land, shows us he is out of cards, and passes it back. We are once again going to just play some lands, Agony Warp the blocker, swing in, and try to close this game as fast as possible. Didn't need to deploy the Agony Warp there. He probably would have blocked the 5/5 anyway. But we go ahead and swing with everything. We don't draw with the Ninja because now we're at 4 cards in deck. We really don't want to die to something weird or crazy like a Sign in Blood. So elect to be a little bit safe there. Opponent goes down to 3 here. Opponent plays a Spirited Companion, top decks a Core Skyfisher and plays it. We just counterspell the Core Skyfisher. And that's going to do it here. Opponent does not scoop, though. Makes us get the final attack in. So we go down to just about 9 minutes on the clock. And we're going to attack with everybody, close the game out. And that is going to do it. The game is over. So that was a crazy game 1. Unfortunately, opponent scoops the match after this game. They take a look at the sideboard. They realize that while they could draw out the game long enough to probably win the match on time, they just scoop it to us since we were able to close out that game. Very nice of the opponent, very gracious of the opponent. Didn't have to do that to give us the match win, but we are grateful to Dairo. It was an absolutely great match. What a slugfest. I mean, it really just was a case of choking them out of resources with the Monarch, playing the slow grindy game and really just making it count. We had to fight through those tokens one at a time and it was crazy. But that shows you the power of this deck. It is absolutely a great deck right now and it is very well positioned in like this mid-gamey, mid-range, control-y style meta that we find ourselves in all of a sudden. We've even seen a resurgence of Grixis Affinity lately, which is kind of crazy. Very, very powerful deck. Alrighty, so now that you've seen a couple of games, let me know what you guys think of the deck down below. As usual, thank you so much for hanging out with me on your Saturday afternoon. Goodbye forever, unless I see you next time. Peace.